If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Well, hello, powerful people, and welcome to the Power Half Hour live on LinkedIn and published for posterity on poweratwork.us. I'm Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. The Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests who I will introduce to you in a minute. Our video audience can see them arrayed in front of you. They look really good from my perspective. The panelists are going to talk about the big stories and the biggest developments affecting worker power, workers, and unions, and important worker power developments that are going to arrive sometime in the future. So they'll look back, they'll look forward, and you'll end up a lot smarter as a result. At the very end of our show, as a tiny little gift to our guests for making you and me more informed about worker power, we're going to turn to shameless plugs and shout outs. Our guests will be invited to promote whatever or whoever they would like, and self-promotion is enthusiastically welcome. And then, if you're hungry for more, stay around for Power Half Hour Overtime. We'll take questions and comments from our live audience and respond to questions we received by email from the Power at Work community. Just go to LinkedIn on the Power at Work page. You can post a comment there. Our producer, Ayush, will go over, grab it, and we'll read it during overtime. That'll happen in about 28 minutes. And now, last thing before I introduce the people who are going to make you smarter, audience, stay up to date with the Power Half Hour by following the Power at Work page on LinkedIn and by subscribing to Power at Work at poweratwork.us. Just fill in the subscription form there. It's absolutely free. We promise we won't give away or sell any of your information. And now let's meet our panel. From the People's Republic of Tacoma Park, Maryland. He's a pro-union consultant and the AFL-CIO's former director of advocacy. It's our longtime friend, Bill Samuel. Hey, Bill.
Hi, Seth.
From the greatest city on earth where melting, I'm told, has occurred, New York, New York. She's a senior reporter covering labor and work for the city. A Power Half Hour favorite. It's Claudia Irizarry Aponte. Hey, Claudia.
Hey, Seth. Thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure. If you keep saying yes, you're going to be here. And from the, let's be honest, traumatized but tough and tenacious Twin Cities of Minnesota, he's a labor economist and a senior researcher at the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. It's Aaron Sojourner. Aaron, great to have you back.
Thanks, Seth. Great to be here.
So let's go to topic number 1, panel. We're going to start with you on this one, Bill. Fair warning. Look over your shoulder or in the rear view mirror and tell us what was the most important or the most interesting development or the biggest news story of the last couple of weeks affecting worker power, unions, and workers. All right, Bill, go ahead.
All right, well, who couldn't use some good news, Seth, in light of all the horrors that are confronting us daily? I am, of course, talking about the Bureau of Labor Statistics report on union membership, which came out just, I think, 2 weeks ago. I think I'm making it right under the wire. It showed that there was an increase, a net increase of over 400,000 new union represented workers in America, up to 16.5 million. That's the highest in 16 years, surprisingly. 36% in the public sector, 6%, 6.8% in the private sector. That's not great news. I think we need to see greater growth among private sector workers, but still the overall numbers look good. And the most surprising finding, I think, was that federal workers who have, of course, been under attack, and their collective bargaining rights have been under attack, actually also gained members, represented numbers, about 40,000. And this is, of course, in 2025, the first year of President Trump's term. So, density is not where it needs to be, obviously, but a little bit of growth is better than continued declines. And if we can do that every year, we may see some increases in worker power. That's really what this is about. At 6% in the private sector, it's still hard to exercise a lot of economic might. But as long as we're steady or growing, that's good news, particularly in today's climate. So that's to me, that's the most important development in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I got a preview of some of the questions that we're going to look at for overtime, and there is a question about this. And the question essentially was some version of, what the hell is going on? I don't understand how this could possibly be true. That's essentially what the viewer asked. So I'm not sure I fully understand what happened in these numbers either. So like you, I saw the increase in the federal worker numbers, which is astonishing and an amazing tribute to the unions and the workers in the federal sector who, in the face of the single worst act of union busting in the history of our country, I mean, you have to go back to President Grover Cleveland calling out the Army to bust the Pullman strike back in the 1890s to find anything like what Trump did. And still, federal sector unions grew. But that doesn't explain, I think there were 410,000 new union members and something in the vicinity of 460,000 or 480,000 workers covered by union contracts, represented by unions. I can't figure it out. Now, I didn't parse through every single piece of the data. Bill, do you have a sense, and Aaron, if you want to jump in on this too, do you have a sense of where did this come from?
I don't, although I would say it reminds me a little bit about what happened after the Janus decision came down in Wisconsin over collective bargaining, where public sector workers lost the right to bargain, and AFSCME went right to work and signed up a whole lot of new members, and I think actually did not really suffer any overall or net losses in union membership, despite the fact that they lost the right to have collective bargaining in the state.
Yeah, it could just be that the unions are organizing. I also saw some growth in the construction sector, which I think is not surprising, given that the infrastructure law is still out there, and the building and construction trade unions are definitely
and the data centers and
yeah. Aaron, you have any more insight into this?
Well, I'd say that these estimates are always a bit noisy. Like, they're based on surveys of hundreds of thousands of workers over the course of the year, and in particular, they're based on measures where they just ask workers, like, are you a member of a union? Are you represented by a union in your workplace? And I think workers' knowledge of those things shifts a bit sometimes too, as different events make it more salient. So I could see, it makes sense to me that, like, federal employee union membership rates might go up because, like, all of a sudden federal workers are experiencing this, like, intense attack and turning to each other to act together in this situation. And that's the story Bill told, and that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't explain why the share of workers covered by union contracts or working under a contract went up, because, like, they're revoking bargaining rights and unionization rights en masse from entire agencies. So I think that's probably measurement error to some extent. I wouldn't, like, overinterpret that part of it, but I do think the membership could be quite real. And I think the broader trends overall, I would take away, like, stability, and it's consistent with a lot of public opinion survey data that's been out there, which is basically like, unionization is more appealing to people. It's becoming more popular among Americans. It's at record high levels. If you look back over 60 years of public opinion data, like it's high. People are more favorable towards unions than they have been ever on record. And they're less favorable towards big business than they ever have been on record. So, even though the union density numbers are kind of stagnant, and the cultural and like popular understanding it's rising. So.
Yeah. All right, Claudia, let's come to you and ask you, what is the biggest, most important story that you've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks affecting worker power and unions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest story in New York with regards to union by far over the last month has been the nurses' strike in New York City. It is now over, but at its peak, it was the largest and longest strike of its kind in New York City history. We're talking about 15,000 nurses who were on strike for more than a month, fighting for better wages, of course, but mostly, the crux of the strike was that they wanted better nurse to patient ratios and protections against workplace violence. Of course, we know, we've discussed on this program before, just the sky high rates of injuries and violence against nurses in the workplace in this country. And they also wanted protections, just job protections and protections against artificial intelligence. Those were some of the big kind of hot button issues that they were discussing kind of at the bargaining table, and they won. It was a defensive strike, I would say, for most of the duration. Nurses were really just trying to make sure that the hospitals weren't clawing back, especially for the two hospitals that had gone on strike in a much smaller work stoppage in 2023, Mount Sinai and Montefiore. They were really trying to prevent hospital administrators from clawing back on some of the wins, especially on nurse to patient ratios that they won 3 years ago. But there's a really interesting element to the strike that really did not materialize till towards the end. And it was a situation with nurses at New York Presbyterian, which was, I believe, the largest of the three hospitals that struck earlier this year. And they held out for longer. So all three hospitals went on strike. This is Mount Sinai, Montefiore, and New York Presbyterian on January 12th of this year. Mount Sinai and Montefiore settled their contracts. They reached a tentative agreement about 30 days into the strike. And New York Presbyterian nurses wanted to hold out for longer because they believed that they did not have yet language on safe staffing and nurse to patient ratios that would really satisfy the rank and file. And what NYSNA, the New York State Nurses Association, did was that, these two hospitals reached tentative agreements. They all bargained separately. These two hospitals reached tentative agreements. Let's put it up to a vote with the New York Presbyterian nurses, even though they haven't yet reached a tentative agreement. Let's just have them vote on this. And the response from the rank and file was strong, and it was swift. There was a mutiny among rank and file members at New York Presbyterian against union leadership, pretty much a worst case scenario, I think, for any union organizer or union leader when you have your own members in this. At this point, the strike had been going on for a month. You have a very strict target with management, and suddenly that anger gets turned against, union leadership. That, I think, is about as bad as it gets. With rank and file members, denouncing the move in the first place, calling for an internal investigation on union leadership, because they really felt, and this is just me just describing what I heard from rank and file members and members of the bargaining committee, that they had really been sold out by union leadership and being forced, in their words, to vote for a contract that they did not believe really represented the best for their members. And they rejected it resoundingly. I believe it was rejected by a 3-1 margin. The participation rate, the vote turnout rate, I should say, was more than 90%, which is unheard of. When you have most of your members rejecting your contract and voting to extend the strike, that really just sends a strong message, not just to union leadership, but of course also to the hospital. And the strike was extended for about an additional week. And then the members reached an actual tentative agreement, voted on that, and also approved it by a resounding margin by 93%. They won the raises. They won the staffing enforcement ratios that they were asking for. The hospital agreed to prioritize staffing for some of the neediest units within the hospital, the emergency department, the cath lab. But I think that the effect of this kind of rank and file and member-led movement within that hospital, which hadn't struck, I think, certainly not at any time in recent memory or any time in any of the current nurses' working lives, really sends a strong message, I think, to other unions in New York that are organizing right now for their own potential strikes this spring. It sends a really strong message to the healthcare sector. This was a really ugly strike. The three hospitals jointly spent $100 million, perhaps more, on travel nurses, and the nurses, won anyway. And it was led mostly by the rank and file. And obviously, NISA leadership deserves kind of like their flowers as well for really holding the line and negotiating these contracts in the first place and organizing the rank and file so that they were ready on day one of this strike. But I think the effects of this rank and file mutiny and just, that they, especially in this specific hospital, New York Presbyterian, where they feel that they were really kind of like the leading charge in trying to get this strike resolved and getting results for their own membership, is going to have like really fascinating kind of like outcomes for that union internally and for the rest of the healthcare sector and organizing in New York in general. And
so our viewers should keep an eye on your byline in the city to keep up with that. All right, Aaron, I want to come back to you, even though you talked a little bit about the union member survey. Anything you wanted to add about what's happened over the last couple of weeks? Big story, big news, big development.
I mean, the big story for me in the Twin Cities is what's happened here. And I think it is nationally important because I think it really shows the strengthening of inclusive social movement unionism and the power of that strategy, and sort of leaves a lot of strategies based on exclusion and protecting privilege kind of in the rearview mirror. We saw the federal government come in, multiply the number of immigration agents here by a factor of 16. It was like, they're driving around overarmed in big groups, running red lights, grabbing people off the street, breaking down people's doors without judicial warrants, violating people's rights. And it was a broad civic movement of people here sort of woke up and acted. It was very decentralized. It was really like anarchism kind of having a movement, very leaderful, full of mutual aid and community self-defense, bottom up. And also there was a coalition that was centered on labor and community groups, including immigrant-rooted membership organizations, immigrant-led organizations, and faith communities that provided a lot of coordination, resources, tables to act together and make decisions together. And, that the key focal point of that was the Day of Truth and Freedom, when tens of thousands of Minnesotans marched, under banner of ICE out and no work, no school, no shopping. I think union contracts were in effect. People used them to use contractually provided schedule flexibility, paid time off to participate. A lot of non-union workers showed up and didn't, took the day off. And, the unions won't call it a general strike, but it was, a general strike here for a day. And it was a beautiful day, and it was a very powerful statement, I think. Tens of thousands of people marching in 20 degrees below. And, then the next morning, DHS agents killed Alex Preddy, who is an AFGE member, who's a VA nurse, public employee. And, that was really a breaking point where the administration had to stop doubling down. And because of the video that neighbors and observers recorded and this whole series of events, and this whole movement, people here really, I think, changed the course of the trajectory of the immigration enforcement policies and just empowerment of federal agents to act with impunity in our country. And so the labor movement was very central to that. Working people were very central to that. And it was a inclusive, broad view and strategy of workers and working families in coalition that made that happen.
Yeah, a people-powered movement forced an armed occupying force out of their city. Just to sum it up that way, and your story about it, which I know you lived, you and I were in touch during the occupation. It was appalling and frightening for you and for a lot of people in the city, but watching people rise up and organize to force these occupiers out of their city was really, hopefully, a model for the rest of the country, because it's not going to be the last time, I think, that we see CBP and ICE and National Guard and others trying to occupy American cities. That's certainly where this president is located. I'm going to save mine for overtime because it's frivolous and silly, and and I don't want to get in the way of this conversation. So let's go on to topic number 2. Guests, get out your crystal balls. We're going to look into the future, not 2056 or 2099, but the next few weeks, next few months, next few years. What will be the most important story or development or innovation or event affecting workers, worker power, and unions? Claudia, let me let you go first.
Yeah, there's a really interesting and sobering fight brewing at St. John's University out in Queens. The university administration about a week and a half ago announced that it would no longer recognize the American Association of University Professors as the bargaining representative for its faculty and part-time faculty. This is a bargaining unit that's been present at this university since 1970. This is not a group kind of like as we see in other universities, NYU, for example, that has formed recently, and they're just trying to force them out. There have been many decades here of labor peace, many successful contracts, and the university is trying to kick out the union based on this fairly recent precedent set by the NLRB in 2020, citing religious exemptions. This is the Catholic university. So there's obviously like the faculty and AAUP are fighting back pretty strongly against this. It doesn't sound like, when I've talked to other experts, and I'm curious to hear about the folks in this room, it really does sound like the AAUP is in for a really ugly fight here. It's one thing if, as the university has tried to argue, in the NLRB kind of like equivalent here at the state level, the PERB, that the religious exemptions do not apply. Obviously, federal law supersedes, president law supersedes state law every time. It'll be interesting to see how the faculty chooses, or if they choose to assert their power here in other ways, perhaps by withholding their labor, going on strike. But it's going to be a knockdown, drag out fight, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. What the university offered is to honor their latest offer. The university and the faculty union have been bargaining now for about a year or two for a new contract. And what the university basically offered a week and a half ago was, we're willing to honor the terms of our most recent offer to you in terms of wages and other economic issues, but we want you guys out of here. I also wonder if the Pope will try to get involved, if the union will try to, appeal to Pope Leo. He chose the name Leo the 16th. Leo the 16th, because he wanted to be kind of like the a pope for working people, and kind of like wanted that legacy. I'm curious to see if he will step in and try to reach a resolution here. So if the Vatican, if the Pope, if you're watching this, please call me, Your Holiness.
Well, let me just say, I don't feel that, for confidentiality reasons, I don't feel I can tell you whether or not he's watching or not. But let me also say, one of the reasons he took the name Leo, and he's an American Pope, right, of course, so he really knows what's going on, is to point back to an earlier Pope Leo who issued a papal encyclical known as Rerum Novarum, which is a wholehearted endorsement of worker power and unionization and worker organizing.
Correct.
And so can I just say, if I'm the leadership of St. John's University, I might feel a lot more comfortable at the NLRB than I would in the Vatican. Yeah. Because if this goes to the Pope, it's not going to come out right for the leadership of, and St. John's is not the only Catholic institution doing this. Correct. I believe Loyola in California and maybe Loyola Chicago and others are doing it as well to try to get out from under their union contracts. in reliance on Catholic doctrine, and I don't think that I don't have standing to say. I think that a lot of people would say that they don't really have standing on Catholic doctrine either. All right, Aaron, let me come back to you. Look into your crystal ball. Tell us what's coming down the pike next few months, next few years, maybe a little beyond that.
I got next few years, and it's an extension of the thing I just talked about. But basically, I think a huge issue is, whether this moment can be shifted from like a defensive posture to an affirmative push for a pathway to citizenship, like a reframing and reordering of the discussion around these issues, because there are real economic benefits to having an orderly immigration system, and those benefits are broad to consumers, to workers, to businesses, to local governments, state governments, federal governments, like that. And so, research shows that deporting immigrants pushes up housing costs, right? Because immigrants disproportionately work at building residential housing. Deporting immigrants leads to more deaths for American seniors because they disproportionately work as personal care aides and home health aides and in nursing homes. And without them, seniors die. And there are millions of people, immigrants here, who are being productive, contributing to the community, not hurting their neighbor, not doing anything wrong in the community, and finding a way for them to get right with the law and have a American dream come true here is in a lot of people's interests. And President Reagan had a lot of disagreements with him on many policy areas, but he 40 years ago did lead towards comprehensive immigration reform and said basically, like, if you're productive and haven't hurt anybody, you have to get right with the law. Pay $185. That's the fee. It's like a expensive parking ticket. In today's money, that's about $600. Pay a fee, get right with the law, and welcome to the American dream. And I think a big question is whether the politics of this issue and the economics of this issue and the sort of humanity of this issue can be shifted in our country over the next couple of years.
Bill, you want to opine on whether you think that kind of an arrangement is possible? And then you should go ahead and tell us what you think is coming down the pike as well.
Well, I was just going to say, we're going to go from the sublime to the ridiculous here, talking about the Catholic teachings and the clash over immigrant rights. And what I'm looking at are elections. I hate to say it. I can't break free of my focus on legislation and Capitol Hill. And of course, starting today in Texas with the primary election, and then the chance that Democrats have increasing chance of taking back the House, maybe the Senate. I think, to be serious for a minute, this has everything to do with whether we can finally make improvements in the law to make it possible for workers to organize in this climate, in a very, growing business power, labor under attack every day. And we obviously, changing the law is long overdue. It's been decades since we've even looked at the National Labor Relations Act in a way to keep up with changes in the economy. So these elections really are important. A lot of people talk about them, but I'm very focused on the primaries this spring, again, starting in Texas. The Democratic turnout seems to be exploding in Texas, and obviously all the midterm elections that have happened in the last year show the same thing. Democrats' enthusiasm is on the side of Democrats. Republicans are on their heels, and that can only portend well for the future of worker power.
Who's going to win in Texas? You can't leave us hanging. Which Democrat is going to be the Democratic nominee? The Republicans are going to end up in a runoff in Texas.
Probably. I think Tallarico seems to be, a little bit ahead. He got, of course, a big boost with the television spot that he had with
the Stephen Colbert
Stephen
controversy.
Colbert.
Yeah,
That's right. I mean, Crockett is appealing to a broad swath of people in Texas, not just African Americans. But it's showing enthusiasm, and I think Democrats are going to they're going to be a lot more Democrats showing up today, which is a good sign. The Republicans have three awful candidates. One's worse than the other. So, but if Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, wins, which he's expected to, I think that gives the Democrats a real shot at winning Texas. But we've got other states to defend in Georgia, Michigan, and we got to flip, Ohio and Maine and Alaska, maybe Texas, maybe Nebraska. Anyway, we can go on and on about that.
So you did a good job dodging that question. Nice job. Okay, it's time for everybody's favorite shameless plugs and shout outs. Each guest will get a very short amount of time. We're already running late, so take about a minute each if you don't mind. And you can plug or shout out anyone or anything you would like. Aaron Sojourner, what's your shameless plug or shout out?
I'll just say Waylon Wong chose as her indicator of the week on Planet Money this week. A piece of research I did with somebody to measure the impacts of the DHS agent surge on how much workers in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area lost in terms of wages over the January through mid-February. So check it out. Thanks, Waylon.
Yeah, let me say I proudly retweeted and also I think supported on LinkedIn that research. It's a very, very, very important piece of research. This immigration enforcement stuff is not free. It's costing us immensely in many, many, many different ways. Okay, Bill Samuel, what's your shameless plug or shout out?
Okay, as I always say, I don't produce anything worth shouting about or bragging about, but so I'll return to my former place of employment, the AFL-CIO Tech Institute. Is really growing and building their ability to respond to AI and the threat to workers. They just hired Lauren McFerrin, former NLRB member, as the new executive director. They produced a set of worker-centered AI principles. Check it out, AFL-CIO TechInstitute.org.
Just so that she gets her correct attribution. Lauren was the chair of the National Labor Relations Board. You only made her you demoted her to member. She was actually the chair, and she's a terrific pick for them. Okay, yeah. Claudia Irizarry Aponte, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Seth, we were talking about this before the show started, but I will say we got almost 2 feet of snow in some parts of New York a week ago, and walking outside today, you wouldn't be able to tell. So I want to shout out Mother Nature for making it warm enough for the snow to melt, first of all. But I also want to shout out, just the hardworking men and women of the New York Sanitation Department and the 1,400 New Yorkers who signed up as volunteer snow shovelers to really clear the streets. It really made a difference. So that's my shout out.
It absolutely. And credit to the mayor for organizing those people and motivating those people to come out. And he also hired a bunch of people at reasonable wages, not fantastic wages, to help shovel things out. That made a huge difference, from what I understand, in the city. Okay, for Claudia Irizarry Aponte, Aaron Sojourner, Bill Samuel, and our producer, Ayush Kanvalkar, thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. Stick around for the Power Half Hour overtime. We'll take your comments and questions, but for right now, class is dismissed. Okay, everybody, take a breath, take a sip of water, take a breather. This will give Ayush an opportunity to post the questions that we got over email in the chat for me. I did want to, I was going to talk about something that's happened. Actually, it was breaking news just minutes before we appeared magically on LinkedIn. So I just I want to mention this, not because it's important, but because it's insane. I mean, it's crazy that we're in this position. So just this news broke again, not long before we started this show. 2 top aides to Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer were forced to resign Monday night amid an internal investigation. The internal investigation is of Secretary Chavez-DeRemer. There's a number of allegations against her using departmental resources for illegitimate reasons like personal travel and birthday parties for her in the department. There's also allegations that she had an extramarital affair with a member of her security detail, which I'm not sure there's a Labor Department rule. I guess there is a Labor Department rule that prohibits that. And so the secretary's chief of staff, which I believe is pronounced Jihoon Han, and deputy chief of staff Rebecca Wright were given 24 hours to resign. And that order came from Donald Trump's White House, which I never thought I would hear of a story like that. So now we know who the scapegoats are going to be. We were talking about this before we started. I don't think that means that Secretary Chavez de Remer is going to resign. Let me say also, I don't think this has any implications for worker power in the least. There is no organization less interested in worker power, perhaps than maybe the Business Roundtable, than the U.S. Department of Labor under its current leadership. So I think it has no meaning of any kind, except it's deeply sad for the people Bill and I used to work at the U.S. Department of Labor, and for the working people who rely on the U.S. Department of Labor for a whole bunch of resources and enforcement and protection of their rights. It's just very, very sad. It's not as sad as the war that President Trump started, but it is a sad moment in the labor world. Okay. I'm going to skip the question that was about the Bureau of Labor Statistics Union Members Survey, because I think we covered all of that. So here's another. So here's from a member of our Power at Work community. I saw a news article that some unions, including the UAW, are pressing Chuck Schumer from New York. He's the Senate minority leader, the Democratic leader in the United States Senate. So the UAW and other unions are pressing Chuck Schumer to end his support for Governor Janet Mills in the Maine Senate race and to support Graham Plattner. Apparently, Schumer said no. Why do unions still give money to the Democratic Party to spend against union-endorsed candidates? Bill, this is right up your alley, my friend. So I'm going to ask you to take it first.
It is. I met Graham Plattner up in Maine. I volunteered this summer to help out with the AFL-CIO bus tour, and I volunteered to go to Maine in August. Not the worst assignment. Graham Plattner showed up at a number of the events, speaking events. I was very impressed with him. He seems like the real deal, a working class, very populist in his outlook, very articulate and personable. Great history. He was a Marine. He's now an oyster fisherman. He was the harbor master in his small town. Why do Democrats keep doing it? Because Chuck Schumer and people, at his level, they're focused entirely on winning, and they have I think a very traditional view of what it takes to win. They're looking at a broad swath of politics and the history of primary elections, and they think the person who can win is the person who can raise the most money, who's got the biggest profile. Obviously, the governor, Janet Mills. She seems like a shoo-in. Surprisingly, though, Graham Plattner is now ahead in the polls. Maine's a small enough state you can meet everybody, and I think Graham Plattner is getting around to is doing that, and they're impressed with him when they meet him. He's got some troubling history. You've made, Seth, you've probably heard about the tattoo and the various Reddit posts. He's had some controversy in his past, but he rarely admits to it. Says, I've grown out of it. I learned a lot. And I think the rank and file and labor, by the way, he's gotten the UAW endorsements, some IBW locals, the nurses union. I don't know who's endorsed Janet Mills, but I'm not surprised Chuck Schumer is sticking with who he thinks is the likely winner.
Does that conflict? I mean, I think you did a great job laying out what sort of the internal logic for Chuck Schumer is, and that is, I want to win, got the governor, she's got a mountain of money, she's the most likely candidate to win. But now he's in conflict with people that he badly needs, not just in that race, but all around the country, and the entities that provide a very substantial amount of not just financial support, but people power to power Democratic campaigns. And they're pretty, they're upset about it enough that there was a story in the New York Times, and there have been stories in other outlets about how upset they are right? That doesn't just, as you know very well, that doesn't just happen. That happens because people call up reporters and say, hey, I'm really upset and I've got a story for you. So, sometimes you make the long-term play because the short-term play is going to cost you. Here, he seems to be making the short-term play. Are there lasting implications, Bill?
Well, if Graham Plattner wins, there's some implications for Chuck Schumer's leadership. There are a number of candidates now running who will refuse to endorse him as majority leader if they take back the Senate. I think Graham Plattner is probably one of them. Listen, Labor and Chuck Schumer and other leadership types, they disagree occasionally. They're still friends. They still want the same thing. They want a Democratic majority. I don't think there are really long-term implications for the relationship there. It may prove that Chuck Schumer's brand of politics may be out of date, and it's time to to kind of update your outlook about what's important to rank and file voters and union members.
Yeah. Aaron or Claudia, do you want to get in on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Bill said. I also think that just kind of like putting on kind of like my Schumerologist hat on for a second, like I think that just the effect of like the Graham Plattner controversy over the tattoo and the Reddit post really cannot be overstated. Like I frankly don't see Chuck Schumer lining up behind a candidate who has atoned for these previous comments and for his tattoo of a neo-Nazi symbol. He says that he had no idea that it was a neo-Nazi symbol, but of course, with Chuck Schumer being kind of like the most prominent Jewish man in the Senate right now and in government, I really don't see him lining up behind Graham Plattner or volunteering volunteering forcefully for him. We'll see if that changes if he becomes a nominee. It certainly didn't happen for, Zoran Mamdani. He stayed out of the mayor's race, and the accusations against Mamdani were not nearly as serious as, the behavior that was outlined by Graham Plattner online, and again with the tattoo and all that. So I think it's really personal for Schumer. It's not just the fact that he is a kind of like old school, and he's very traditional in the candidates that he supports. I think that it's very personal for him. So we'll see if that changes if he becomes a nominee.
I'm really glad you mentioned Mamdani in this, because that's another circumstance where Schumer and I believe Hakeem Jeffries did not endorse Mamdani before he won election. I know I'm right about Schumer. I agree with you on Schumer. I think I'm right about Hakeem Jeffries as well. The governor endorsed, and most of the other leaders in the state endorsed, but those two, and I don't know what Gillibrand did. I think she also did.
Jeffries did like the weekend before, didn't he?
Yeah, he endorsed him after he won the primary, but many weeks later, leading up to the general. But Schumer stayed out of it entirely for the entire race.
Are there going to be consequences to Schumer turning his back on the Democratic nominee for mayor?
I don't know. I mean, he's up for re-election in 2028. We'll see if he faces any strong primaries here in his home city. The candidates who are seeking to challenge him. Obviously, it's right. It's AOC. She's ripe for the taking in this case if she wants it. It seems like she's more interested in the presidency than the Senate. I don't see someone like Richie Torres, for example, challenging Chuck Schumer because they're very aligned politically. We'll see if Schumer decides to retire. We'll see what the polling looks like in a couple of years when he's up for re-election. But yeah, I think it's going to be, it's a little difficult to tell what the consequences for him will be immediately, just in terms of like his seat, for example, his current kind of like seat in the Senate. If the Democrats take back the Senate, I don't know, maybe there will be serious challenges to his leadership in that chamber, but I'm not sure kind of like what the tea leaves are. There's still a lot of things that are up in the air about in terms of that. So I don't really know, but yeah.
Yeah, I think he's a greater risk back in New York than he is in the Senate. I don't think he'll be, particularly if the Democrats take back the Senate, I don't think he'll be displaced. I think there's a somewhat greater possibility. More likely he'd be displaced if he were still the minority leader. But even then, I'm not sure it's worth. I think people feel like it's not necessarily worth fighting for yet. But I think the risk of a primary, and obviously AOC is the likeliest candidate, but there are a lot of other people who could run against the Senator Schumer from the left. And he's a great fundraiser, and he's really good at doing those Sunday press conferences out on the sidewalk about absolutely nothing and getting coverage. But he is not built for the social media age. He is not built for grassroots campaigning. He can be, I think that he would probably be vulnerable, particularly if the mayor of the city endorses his opponent. And I think that there's some risk that would happen now, because there's obviously no love lost between the two of them. I think it'll be interesting to see. Okay, let me get on to our second question. This may be a New York question as well. State and local governments seem to be getting into the business of regulating labor issues more and more. For example, I saw that New York City has a law setting prevailing wages for building services workers, and another new law that will ban 24-hour shifts for home healthcare workers. Is there any hope that states and cities getting active is going to make a meaningful difference for working people? Claudia, you want to start, and then I'll let Aaron and Bill get involved if they'd like.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's both of the proposals that were mentioned here by this listener are kind of like on different tracks. The one for building service workers has been signed into law, so that is in effect. I do want to talk about the home care workers one, because that one's a little bit more complicated. It's the second time that a bill outlining this, banning these 24-hour shifts for home care workers. It's the second time that it's been introduced in the city council. So this would only affect workers within the 5 boroughs of New York. It didn't get off the ground in 2022 or 23 when it was first introduced. And right now it doesn't have enough votes to pass either. It was the subject of a hearing about 2 weeks ago. There isn't like a lot of common ground around home care workers, around banning these so-called 24-hour shifts. I shouldn't say so-called. They are 24-hour shifts. This all stems from a controversy that began 10 years ago with home care workers suing the state of New York. In New York, if you're a home care worker and you work overnight, by law, if you work a 24-hour shift, you're only compensated for 13 of those hours, provided that you get uninterrupted 5 hours of sleep and an additional 3 hours for meals throughout the day. And if we know anything about, the work of home care workers, we know that they rarely sleep through the night. You're working round the clock, taking care of the neediest people in our society and in our own families. And they don't really get an hour per meal to sit down and eat their meals every single day. So what we've heard from many of these workers, many of them immigrant women, is that they're working sometimes 96 straight hours on no sleep. They're not eating. They're scarfing down their meals. They're exhausted. They're getting adverse health effects. And they claim, and honestly, like there are certain like groups and like legal groups that represent them that feel very strongly that they have the argument in their favor that they're victims of wage theft. They've been working, 96 hours, 24 hours a day and only getting paid for half of that time. So what this bill seeks to do is ban the practice of 24-hour shifts. Now, there's not a lot of common ground on this with home care workers, because the issue for them is not necessarily that they're working for 24 straight hours. Lots of, healthcare workers work these kinds of shifts. Is that they want to be compensated for that time. They understand that patients need 24-hour round-the-clock care. They want to provide that care. They just want better pay and safety and on-the-job safety standards. So there's not a ton of common ground. Last time, there were several unions that were against this bill, proposing the 24-hour ban. Right now, the makeup is like a little bit different. 1199, which is like the most prominent union representing home care workers in the state and in the country, they've appeared to just kind of like have like a non-hostility. Like they're not going to actively campaign against it, but it doesn't sound like they're completely for it either. So we'll see what ends up happening with that bill. I frankly don't see it advancing again, but there's still more to come kind of like in this space. But anyway, this is a long way of saying that there's not a ton of agreement on what exactly is the right course of action here.
Yeah. Bill or Aaron, you want to get in on that?
I'll just say more generally that, I think there's a lot of potential for state and local leadership and progress on a lot of dimensions of labor rights and labor regulations. So that yeah, I think this is a time when federalism is important, when like letting 1,000 flowers bloom is good. I think there's federal preemption on like organizing rights, on the core nuts and bolts of protected activity, but on all kinds of terms and conditions, that's fair game. So in Minnesota, we just passed a paid leave law program, created it off the unemployment insurance program. It's a parental leave, it's a medical leave, it's a caregiver's leave. A dozen states have paid leave. New York has safe, fair work week for fast food workers, has just cause for fast food workers. Other states and municipalities have those. There's a broad range of activities and policies that can be acted on. So
yeah, what's one of the things that is intriguing is that that may be overstating it, some of the laws that we see at the state and local level are occupation specific or industry specific. So you were just talking about home health workers and fast food workers, and certainly there are laws affecting building and construction trades workers. And there's the California Fast Food Workers Union, because there's a special law that establishes labor standards for that population of folks. But very few sort of broadly applicable laws. We do see laws banning captive audience meetings, not just for labor purposes, but for other purposes as well. But not a lot. And obviously there are minimum wage laws and there are paid leave laws and some of those. But a sizable percentage of these laws are particular interest groups that are focusing on their population, their constituents. And in order to make a meaningful difference in the labor market and to make a meaningful difference for workers as a whole, that's going to have to get broadened out. Now, it may be that it is more readily legally defensible to do it occupation by occupation, industry by industry, or it may be less so. There's a challenge to New York's prevailing wage law, for example, on that basis. So it'll be interesting to see.
It seems like it's more a political solution, than an economic solution. Like it's when there's some local actor who's strong enough to move it for their thing, and there's not a blocking coalition, it moves. But if you try to move it big, then there's a blocking coalition. Too many
opponents, right? Distributed costs, distributed benefits, concentrated costs. Yeah, that's it. Bill, you want to get in on this at all? I'm sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah. No, what I said earlier, the federal labor law hasn't changed in decades. I think states, particularly blue states, are stepping into the void and trying to do as much as they can legally, dealing with preemption issues. You're seeing that all over the country. And I think you're only going to see more of it. Not only have we not changed the labor laws and updated them, but now we have federal administrations not enforcing them, the laws that we have on the books. So that's why states are stepping up and trying to improve working conditions.
I'll just throw in one other area that's worth considering is like non-compete restrictions and non-disclosure restrictions, which were really important sort of in the wake of the Me Too movement. There was a lot of action around banning non-disclosure clauses, gagging clauses, freeing up workers to speak. So those are other areas where there has been some general movement in some places, and there could be a lot more.
Yeah. There was obviously the Biden administration non-compete regulation, which I believe was blocked in the courts and then withdrawn by I don't know if it's actually been withdrawn by the Trump administration. They may feel they don't need to because it was blocked by the courts, but it'd be interesting to see if there's been state action in a few states. There has been. California, for example, has law, but it'll be interesting to see. All right, guests, thank you very much for your patience and staying with us for overtime. Thank you, audience, for staying with us for overtime as well. We're always delighted to have you. We will see you back here on Power at Work again very soon. Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.